The fact that we're currently in a loneliness epidemic isn't exactly groundbreaking news anymore, and I don't intend on being the millionth person to make you aware of this. My specific concern that I want to elucidate pertains to how we talk about reaching out to others, and how its associated talking points come off more threatening than people intend for them to. What inspired me to write this was the last few minutes of a video from More Perfect Union called What OpenAI Doesn't Want You to Know About AI Psychosis. In the last moments of the video, the victim of AI psychosis they were talking with, James, mentioned how it's important to reach out to people or else they'll open themselves up to similar psychological risks. Specifically, he says, listen to them more attentively and with more compassion than ChatGPT is going to, because if you don't, they're going to go talk to GPT. The way he worded that and the implied threat it presents immediately reminded me of a moment from high school that still sticks with me to this day. I was in history class, and as is traditional for most high school history classes, we briefly discussed current events. And as is traditional for Americans, a recent mass shooting was in the news and on our minds. The teacher saw it fit to go to the front of the class and give a solemn statement, not about gun control or how tragedies shouldn't be politicized, but instead, some advice. He said, if you see someone alone at lunch, or a student who seems left out, that you should reach out to them because they could become the next mass shooter. Now, putting aside the fact that mentally ill people in general are actually much more likely to be the victims of violent crime than commit one themselves, I think what that teacher said was in good faith. What my teacher and James said have a similar sentiment: socialize or else. This is a very ineffective call to action, and that has to do with the different forms of reward and punishment. Most people are used to a reward giving them something, and a punishment taking something away, but it's more of a spectrum than that. In psychology, this is defined in 4 categories: positive reward, positive punishment, and negative punishment. We're already familiar with what a positive reward and a negative punishment are, but what is a negative reward and a positive punishment? As weird as those things sound, you experience them every day. One of the most common examples is what happens when you're about to drive your car without a seatbelt on. As you begin to switch out of park, your car plays an annoying beeping warning. This is a positive punishment. Your car is punishing you by adding an annoying stimuli. To make it go away, you buckle up and your car presents you with a negative reward. The annoying beeping stops. You were rewarded by the car taking something bad away. Negative rewards are pretty effective for small tasks in the short term, like buckling up in your car, but they're not as effective for developing long-term habits. I'm pretty sure most of us would perform better at work if we were told we would get a positive reward, like a pay raise, over a negative reward, like removing your name from the next round of layoffs. People want to feel a sense of progress in return for a long-term commitment of their time and energy into something, and negative rewards don't fill that fundamental need. So, how do these flavors of motivation apply to socializing? Usually, people make the case for it in terms of positive rewards. You want to socialize because you can make friends, participate in outings that are more fun with others, and gain perspectives that become useful to you later on. These are all positive rewards because you gain something from these interactions. But the way socializing is framed nowadays has shifted towards negative rewards. You do it to get rid of loneliness, remove the threat of someone causing harm to themselves and others, or to lessen the pain of boredom. These are all negative rewards, and despite them being less effective in motivating people to socialize, it's this framing that more and more people have adopted recently when talking about why it's important to connect with others. I believe that this is a side effect of how most things are reported on in the political sphere, and now that the loneliness epidemic has become a political issue, the way in which we talk about it has been poisoned by the same problems political commentary has. As much as people love to complain about how bad doom scrolling is for them and how much they hate hyper-sensationalist headlines and articles, they're spreading like the plague for a reason. In the marketplace of ideas, attention is the only real currency, and these headlines keep getting worse because they work. People are voting with their currency by paying them more attention. Robert Walker covers this issue extensively in his article called Why News Outlets Twist the Headlines to Make Things Around the World Sound a Lot Scarier Than They Should Be. I'd recommend giving it a read, especially if you struggle with sensationalist news. Even before the loneliness epidemic was widely reported on, political circles were already suffering from the illusion that people need to be scared and angry to make them uncomfortable enough that they feel forced to act. The fallout of this strategy resulted in the contrary. Hordes of extremely depressed people, unmotivated to do anything about the world because the tsunami of hot-button issues feel impossible to realistically solve. What's worse is that we're being plunged into an environment where people are not just being told what to think, but how to feel. YouTuber Amanda's Mild Takes, someone I also highly recommend, put it best when she said, quote, "It does bother me when creators tell other people how to feel. You should be terrified. You should be panicked. This should scare you." Even if the thing is bad, let me decide. I'm grown. Let me decide how I'm going to feel. Just as this formula of teaching people to fear political issues has resulted in many shying away from them because it makes them depressed, I'm worried that the same effect applied to socializing will make people afraid of doing that too. People aren't going to be as enthusiastic about making friends if it's seen as a defensive practice instead of a pleasure measure. You're not reaching out to people because you're trying to protect yourself from someone becoming a mass shooter or psychosis sufferer. You're doing it because it's emotionally fulfilling and an important part of the human experience. You're getting a positive reward, a new friend, instead of a negative reward, removing danger. Only one of those reward types are going to help solve the loneliness epidemic. That said, I'm not naive. Socializing was already something people were anxious about even before this problem started taking shape. If anything, the way our qualms with socializing have built up over time is what has led people to take up the socialize or else talking point. In their minds, the socially discontent are either taking out their frustrations on humanity through violence or giving up on it by turning to AI. While I don't think anyone is taking their feelings of frustration and despair to those levels of action as much as some would like to think, those two feelings definitely describe how many people feel about the increasing volatility in social interaction. Once again, I'm going to blame a function of common political discourse because the way we interact on that front seems to be a precursor to how we socialize in general. Maybe that's the reason all the oldies are complaining so much about how everyone seems too desensitized to political issues these days, but I digress. The divisiveness of political opinion, especially in America, has given rise to hard binaries, where people are quick to put you in an ally or enemy category, no in between. This is evident in the campus language used in modern politics, like rhino, Republican in name only, class traitor, grifter, shill, and many others I don't feel like wasting your time with by listing. These terms come out to play pretty quickly as soon as a politician makes one step away from the strict party line or expectation of what your political tribe is supposed to be doing. And while I agree that politicians should be held to high standards, this unfortunately seeps into our everyday interactions to the point that we treat those we socialize with like politicians. These hard binaries have gotten us much too comfortable with immediately writing someone off over the slightest issue. I'll admit, I genuinely struggle to get this point across to Gen Z and other young people. When you're in a social environment where admitting you like apples must mean you hate oranges, it's hard to comment on delicate issues like this without someone trying to apply the same mentality to your messaging. It's tiring. I hate making this point to then be asked, so what, you want me to be friends with someone who doesn't believe in human rights? Even that question is revealing of the problem I'm outlining. The hard binary is person who agrees with me on everything, or evildoer who doesn't believe in my right to exist. It's not like we consciously decide to act like this either. There's a formula to this widespread social manipulation. Like I mentioned earlier, it starts with sensationalist articles. Media outlets learn they can get more attention in the marketplace of ideas by stoking feelings of anger and fear. This then affects people's outlook on politics in general, including whatever happens to be politicized at the time. And finally, because of the omnipresence of politics in American social life, these patterns then seep into our normal interactions. That's how it worked for the socialize or else problem, but how does this pattern apply to hard binaries? One form of sensationalist political media that's popped up in the past decade is bad faith debates. These are about ballooning sensationalism as much as possible by taking the most extreme examples of political pundits and pitting them against each other with the naive excuse of trying to open a dialogue. In my opinion, Jubilee is the biggest offender, and they've platformed everyone from leftists to participants who proudly identify as fascists. Bloodsport entertainment in and of itself is not inherently a bad thing, but the frequency of the themes we put in media shift the public's expectations of the greater world. For example, due to the frequency of reporting on homicides and plane crashes, I'm sure plenty would assume that homicide is a pretty prevalent cause of death right now, and that plane crashes are a very dangerous form of transportation. But these two assumptions couldn't be further from the truth. Heart disease claims immensely more people per year than homicides, and so do cars more than planes. The reason homicides and plane crashes get more attention is because they're emotionally hard-hitting. They're rare. But unfortunately, the public gets the opposite impression. Like plane crashes and homicides, the same effect is happening with political bloodsport entertainment. It's eaten up so much of the spotlight of new media that you can understand now why I say that Gen Z and other young people struggle with this the most. They're the target audience for this kind of content. When this is their looking glass into how people feel about politics, especially if they don't socialize enough with others in the real world to just ask them, then it's easy for them to get the impression that every person out there is either on your side or out to get you, despite that being the furthest thing from reality. This teaches people to make assumptions within a hard binary where any little disagreement is seen as a crack in a fascist facade and not, as it is for a lot of the world, evidence that people are complicated and likely to occupy some variant of a political gray area. What's unfortunate is that victims of modern sensationalism believe that this hard binary is a good defensive skill that saves them the effort of accidentally wasting time on someone they weren't going to like anyways. But this runs contrary to the youth's wishes to socialize more. They stop learning to communicate with others when they're upset or to be open about their expectations. In the worst scenarios, the absence of mediation becomes imitation. If they don't know what mediating disputes between their friends looks like, that void is filled by how they see people treating each other in bad faith debate content and on social media. Their social climate becomes more about drama than stability. Call-out culture, as some would describe it. As awkward as it sounds, it's this kind of behavior that drives me to believe that we should be teaching grade school classes about how to be a good friend, how to be there for someone who's going through mental health issues, and how to communicate through difficult social situations. The second we assume something is common sense is the second we realize that the things we take for granted aren't instinctual. The last part I've noticed in this overall climate of social anxiety is the lack of bite-sized friends. Due to the loneliness many are experiencing, there's a strong urge to turn any positive interaction into a long-lasting friendship. It puts too much weight on new interactions, and I think the idea of a friend but just for the trial period would maybe help some people get out more since the pressure of commitment isn't as persistent. A bite-sized friend is something like this. Maybe you're stuck at an airport for a 2-hour layover, or you're at a party hopped up on who knows what, and such circumstances act as a social glue between you and someone else in that situation. The catch, however, is that eventually your planes arrive or the party ends and you go your separate ways. As sad as that sounds, this social function can be liberating because it allows people to talk about things they usually wouldn't, or test out expressing parts of themselves that they're still working on. It also acts as a way of keeping people in check because it exposes them to opinions outside their social bubble or critique they might not otherwise get. The internet has tried to emulate this social function through websites like Omegle, but they lack the real-world environment that keeps everyone at some minimum level of respect since they're in public. I think this social function holds value and, as such, believe it went away not because it's an outdated relic, but rather something we can't properly experience due to constraints like the lack of third spaces. And yes, while the lack of third spaces has worsened the loneliness epidemic, there are still things we can do as individuals to make tackling this problem easier. That means being honest with ourselves about the behaviors we've picked up that make us our own worst obstacle at times. For a lot of people, especially those who are invested and even prideful in such behaviors, this is a hard pill to swallow. But really, you have nothing to lose but your loneliness.